What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we'll be jumping straight into another game review, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. But before we jump in, I just want a quick disclaimer at the start of the video. I've been doing a lot of game reviews recently, and that's because I've been playing a lot of games, and I enjoy doing game reviews. They're fun for me. I like examining games, picking them apart, the best and the bad bits, but it's not going to be all I do from now on. I'm just trying to build up the energy to start doing Overwatch videos and other games and that as well on PC, so just bear with me. But today is another gaming review, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Like and subscribe if you do enjoy, and we'll jump straight into it. So, Hellblade. I see Dead People Viking Edition, gross imaginings, and towing the line between AAA and indie games. How did it do? First up is graphics.
What is she leaving behind? I know what she's thinking. I hear her thoughts. It's not too late to get into the boat and go back.
Can you see it?
The land of mist and fog. You took him from me.
So first thing I want to say is this: Senua's Sacrifice is stunning. In many ways one of the best games visually that I've ever played, and not just necessarily down to the mechanical approach to graphics, although that was very good as well. It's more down to the visual direction that this game's creators decided to take. At all times you're surrounded by claustrophobic rustic scenery, mixes of wood and rock that are just there constantly, with some healthy doses of blood, fire and corpses to act as a garnish on top, if you will. But the game doesn't start out like this. In fact, it starts out quite scenic with beautiful water, light and environment effects, really bringing you into the world from the get-go. Only once the game gets the story going does this evolve into the nature of environment that I talked about earlier, steadily bringing in big stone architecture, wooden bridges and pikes and big wrought iron gates and the such. And all of this really plays great into the idea of hell, with one L not two because Vikings, remember? The game steadily rotates the environment design though, some truly harrowing experiences coming in later down the line, bringing in the idea of darkness, hallucination and genuine helplessness. These gameplay mechanics are all helped terrifically by the strong animation work in Hellblade, and Ninja Theory did a really great job of bringing Senua to life. More on that in a bit. As I said, the environment design is a standout here, and the latter half of the game really uses this obvious strength to push your understanding of the game to its limits, bringing in all sorts of wonderfully grotesque but strangely beautiful areas to fight and puzzle in. Overall, the world design here is among the best that I've ever seen, especially and at least in a linear story-driven game. As I mentioned, Senua herself is wonderfully recreated in digital form, and the facial mocap is 110% amongst the best that you will see, and undoubtedly a terrific feat considering the price point of this title. Melina Jurgens, definitely not pronouncing that correctly, does a truly magical job of acting out Senua's physical and mental traumas that she goes through during this experience, and the team behind making her face digital does an astounding job of capturing the emotions behind the performance and translating that into a game world. Really great stuff. Along with her face, the rest of her animations are largely done very well, especially during cutscenes and combat scenarios. You really feel how exhausted Senua must be after all she's been through. Now I'm playing on a GTX 1060 6GB and an i7 7700K clocked at 3.6 GHz, and Hellblade really performed outstandingly for the most part, guys, I'm going to be honest. Obviously I'm playing on a G-Sync screen, so I'm not going to see any screen tearing, but at no stage during my experience did I see the frame count drop below 50 frames per second. I only actually saw it drop below 60 the one time, with all the settings maxed out. That being said though, it is technically an indie game, and it's actually a lot more straining on a GPU than I originally expected it to be, so bear that in mind if you are going to be playing on a lower end card. You're going to have to sacrifice a lot in the settings to play it, I reckon. I do have a couple of bugbears with the graphics though, no matter how good they are. With 90% of what's to be seen being so good, the not so good is glaringly obvious. Senua's hair is actually very well animated, but that and the various gear that she's got strapped to herself will often clip through the character's model and scenery even during cutscenes. These cutscenes are always very up close and personal with Senua herself, so you'd have to be blind as the head she's carrying around on her belt to not notice this. Also, while the vistas and the larger-than-life level design is mostly terrific, it quickly becomes glaringly obvious that the skyboxes, while beautiful, are in fact completely static as far as I could tell. Once you notice it, it's very hard to ignore, unfortunately. Aside from some other small issues like weird water effects later on in the game and some dodgy textures, the graphical prowess that Hellblade shows off really is stunning stuff across the board. Overall, a really great job.
It's not over. It's not over.
Next up is audio. And as usual, voice acting is up first.
The Northmen tell of the warrior woman Brynhild, who leapt into fire and rode to hell to join her slain love Sigurd, and is challenged by the giantess.
The gate is opening.
Who is it? It's coming.
That song again.
Is it? Is it? Is it?
It's Hela.
Yes, the source of the darkness.
She's dreamt of this before. They say dreams are visions of our memories, thoughts, and fears, as seen by our inner eye. But what if each one of us is always dreaming?
Broken and lost. Just like your soul.
Come on. There.
It's the darkness. It's speaking through
No,
you.
Dad, it's me. I think I can beat it. In my own way.
I can see the darkness in your eyes, child.
I met a boy.
Boy.
The chief had son.
No.
He said he could help me.
It's a trick.
He said I could be normal.
Stunning. That's probably the best word I can use to describe the acting of the vocal kind in Senua's Sacrifice. There are 4 or 5 regular voices you hear, not including the grunts and shouts of the creatures you'll be fighting. Obviously the main star here is Senua, and she really is amazing to listen to all the way through this game, with the heavily emotive experience really hitting you in the feels as she's constantly pestered by internal voices, creatures from myth, and the environment as well. Everything from the gameplay noises she makes to the fully voiced cutscenes work very, very well, and I really cannot complain about any of it. The other voice you'll hear the most of is Druth, Senua's long-dead druid friend, as he passes on his knowledge of the gods that you are challenging and the history behind them. At the start of the game I actually thought Druth was overacting a tad, but that wore off, and eventually I started looking forward to his next little tidbit of Asgardian lore that he could pass to me. Later on in the game, the pure fire and anger in Druth's commentary over the challenges you are facing really is incredible stuff. Again, I have no problems with this character in the slightest. Top tier stuff. There are 2 more voices I need to tackle here before jumping onto the elephant in the room, and I'm going to have to be very careful to avoid spoilers. One of these voices is simply the voice of the darkness, the being that inhabits Senua and causes the rot that starts spreading through her as soon as she steps into Helheim. He's good, not to the same level of Druth or Senua, but not bad, and I do feel the actual post-processing on his vocals were a little bit too much towards the side of this is the voice that someone evil should have, and not quite believable enough. Nevertheless though, delivery was good and it fit really well with Senua's lines and the little to and fro-ing they get towards the end of the game. Next up is Dillion, Senua's again long dead lover, and the reason that she steps into hell to begin with. At the start of the game, he's barely in it at all, in all honesty, but the latter half of the game really draws him into the story wonderfully, adding another level of emotive responsibility onto the player during Senua's journey. Everything from visions to flashbacks, it becomes quite hard to tell what's real about his voice and what's fabricated inside Senua's psychosis. Really good delivery and really added to the narrative cleanly. The next one is the doozy, the elephant in the room that I mentioned, and part of what made Hellblade such a surprise success. The voices. None are named, but all are present nearly all the way through the game. 4 or 5 background voices that Senua is either imagining with the psychosis, or they are the voices of the people she feels responsible for after they've died. It's never made too clear either way. They are incessant and constantly commentating on what you're doing during the game, sometimes helping you out, sometimes bringing you down or stressing you out. I don't know who voiced all of these, but the sheer urgency that you feel once these cluster of chatterboxes get really going is something. When they scream at you during combat, shouting behind you or watch out, it adds another level to the fighting in the game.
They surrounded you.
Sometimes during puzzles they'll help you out, other times they'll laugh at you until it's all pointless and that you're going to die, and somehow they keep these voices up throughout all of the 6-hour experience to be found here. Aided by some terrific level and channel manipulation through the left and the right headset and some wonderful post-processing, these voices become an integral part of the experience, one that Hellblade would be distinctly less unique without, despite all of its other strengths. It was a bold design choice to have this sort of insane amount of voices going all the time, and it truly paid off. It was a risk well worth taking. I've never heard anything like it. Not in a video game. I spent some time on voice acting there, so music is up next.
Calling for you. Why don't you join her?
Perhaps not so surprisingly, the music on show in Hellblade is a humble affair for the most part, with the soundtrack giving way more often than not to the other sound effects the game has to offer, whether it be the combat, the environment, or the plethora of voices bombarding you 24/7. That's not to say the music here is weak, it's absolutely not, with some epic pieces playing when fighting bosses or when you're running from something that you can't stab in the face multiple times. Having said that, the soundtrack is a little too sparse of variety for my liking. While the songs go on quite long the majority of the time, you're going to be hearing the same combat piece, for instance. It's like a war chant type thing, and it's cool, but it's not so cool that I want to hear it 50 times during the same game. And it is a shame that there's not more variety in each type of situation that Senua was put into. That said, the soundtrack really does open up towards the end of the game with a couple of very nice tracks in the final level, so keep an ear out for those because they are the gems among all of them. Overall, soundtrack is good, but not enough variety, which is a slight shame. Now we can talk about the environment and ambient sound effects, and this is fantastic from start to finish. Everything from dragging yourself through a corpse-filled lake to running through a cave system, all the way to the epic clashes of metal and flesh in combat, they all sound terrific. The mastering and post-production of the audio is great as well, with particularly good work done on left and right channels, making directional sound effects work very, very well. Something the game relies on for some of its bosses and level designs. Directional sound design is something that so many games get wrong or don't do quite right, that it's really nice to see it's done so well here in Hellblade. The transitions of the environment sound effects here is great as well, so when you leave a cave and wander out onto a beach, through a door into a castle, each area sounds sonically different from the last, whether it's the way you're walking around, the echo on your footsteps, or the feedback from your breathing and moving around, everything works great and without a single audio glitch in sight. Something that is again very impressive in a lower priced title such as this. This transitioning sound design works extremely well with the game mechanics as well, as you can switch realities or worlds from one world that is sunny, for instance, with birds chirping and the wind breezing through the grass, to a stormy rain-filled run-down castle with creaking wood and eerie bass fills, all in a split second and back on a command using some of the mechanics in the environment, with nary an error in the audio anywhere to be found. It really is terrific stuff. Overall, the ambient and environmental sound effects here in Hellblade are practically faultless, and I don't say that very often. Now we'll talk about the gameplay and a little on the story. Senua's Sacrifice follows a story of, surprise surprise, Senua and her journey through Helheim, the Nordic equivalent of the realm run by the horny red man himself. More specifically, she's on a quest to reclaim her lost boyfriend's soul from Hela, the goddess of death. Pretty normal stuff for Vikings, I guess. This is just the overarching story though, and it's really Senua's personal development that steals the show here. No matter how epic and beautiful the main story is, and it is, you get to see her transform from a mentally haunted person, who's pretty good with a sword, to quite frankly a bit of a goddess herself, fighting 6 or 7 enemies all at once, all while struggling to understand the nature of the world she's put herself in, and really putting herself through real turmoil to get to her final goal. This storyline, when coupled with the whole Nordic god lore and the flashbacks in history slowly being drip-fed to you, everything about the story sticks together really nicely and results in what is really a wholeheartedly believable tale, and is very well done from start to finish. I would love to talk about the story more, but there's so much going on that I run the risk of spoiling something if I talk about it anymore. Just know that I would not have changed a single thing about the narrative, even if I had the option to. It's that good. The gameplay on show here is interesting to say the least. It can swiftly change from a Forerunner come Dark Souls combat system, based around timing blocks, parries and rolls, to a puzzler, using magical environmental mechanics to remove and add to the environment, editing your routes and opening doors, and then later in the game falling back onto mechanics that far closer resemble those of horror games, restricting your senses and your traversal while you're being pursued. And these three blends of various mechanics results in a very interesting experience that doesn't quite get everything perfect, at least not all the time. The main problem stems from the puzzling itself. These moments are quite muted, with little or no soundtrack and just your bunch of voices in your head and commentary from the various lore stones scattered around the map. And this is all fine when the puzzles are solved quickly or naturally, but not all the puzzles are particularly self-explanatory or even easy, with puzzles in the latter end of the game actually resulting in a pretty swift death if not done correctly. And this can get infuriating after a few failed attempts, especially if you realise you skipped a mechanic or missed something that the game didn't even have the decency to hint at. It can feel cheap, and with the threat of permadeath if you do die too many times, it can make you even more irate. That all being said, when the puzzling feels right, it feels great. Using magical gates, masks and other such shenanigans to alter the reality and geometry of the area that you're currently in, that so conveniently results in a few beams of light or trails of blood or random sticks matching the shape of a rune that you need to open a door. It feels great, and it's very smooth and well done most of the time. Add this to the bridges that you find yourself having to rebuild by lining up fabrics of other realities, and other similar stuff, and you've got some really nice base mechanics to work from. The main problem is that these tricks and these parlor tricks are nearly all introduced over the first hour of the game, and they never really get elaborated on or evolved, which means after 3 or 4 hours it can almost feel like you're just going through the motions. Luckily, this is relatively short-lived, as towards the end the game introduces more enemy-driven puzzles later on that can be genuinely challenging, and they are the ones that hint more towards the horror tropes of games such as Outlast or Evil Within. And those moments are really quite tense and very well done. Not downright scary, don't worry people that can't handle horror games, but just tense, well done, and genuinely do get your heart racing a little bit. They're great, I love those. The rest of Senua's Sacrifice is essentially just a walking simulator, but calling it that would be a disservice in such a crowded genre, as the atmosphere, storytelling and genuine acting on show turns what could potentially be very dull walking, climbing and running sections into moments that you savour and want to experience over and over again, so I cannot moan here at all. I found myself craving Druf's next injection of Nordic lore, the first time in ages that collectibles have actually impacted the story and potentially the ending properly. Overall, gameplay is quite addictive, with stellar combat, mostly imaginative puzzling and some very nice story sections. Nothing here feels like padding, and where some games falter is trying to hit some kind of imaginative mileage landmark, whereas Senua's Sacrifice is actually a relatively short game, coming in at 6 hours if played slower than other people, but it's 6 hours that you won't forget quickly and will leave you questioning and wondering about the implications of the story for hours after completion. After I finished it, I sat there and just went, what just happened? Because the game does that to you. It's that dramatic, it's that well written, and the characters are that well acted that everything just falls together really, really nicely by the time you finish it. And that's the biggest compliment I can give this game, that it had that kind of effect on me. Not many games do. All that's left for me, guys, is to comment on how fun this game was to play. And yeah, guys, I had a blast, honestly. I had a great time playing this game. It's one of the few single player games I've been able to sit down and just run through in a marathon. I essentially completed it over 2 nights, 3 hours one night, 3 hours another night, and I do not regret it at all, and I will play it again one day. And that doesn't happen a lot for me with many single player games. It was that good. Can I recommend it to you? Yes. There is something here for everyone. The combat is extremely satisfying, very weighty, very well done. The story hits in all the right spots, and the gameplay mechanics that this game does try and bring in at all times really mostly work quite well, even if some of them are overused. Along with the visuals and the audio design, there isn't a lot in Senua's Sacrifice to complain about, which is why some of my complaints probably sound really niggly, because I had to work hard to find genuine negatives. So yes, I fully recommend this game to anyone that can spare 25 quid. It's absolutely worth the price tag, and honestly questions what makes an indie game, because this has been far better. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is far better than many AAA games I've played, and was probably done with a small percentage of the budget that these AAA games get, and not anywhere near as much marketing either. It's so good, you would be doing a disservice to the developers if you didn't play it. Go and buy it, give it a go, you won't regret it. But that'll be it for this video, guys. If you did enjoy, like and subscribe. Let me know what you thought of Hellblade if you've played it down in the comments, and I will see you guys next time. My name's been Zach, you've all been awesome, and peace!